Hi, and welcome to another episode of Ask Geoff and Lauren. We're here to answer your questions about the double bass, and we're going to get straight into today's question from Nuno, who is asking about instrument size and essentially what is the right way. How do you evaluate what size instrument you should consider? And particularly, how do you know when it's appropriate to go for a smaller bass? And we get asked this question a lot, actually. And I think most bass players would rather play smaller instruments. They're easier generally to move around, but there's the sacrifices that you might have in terms of tone. And I don't know, it's a really sort of interesting topic, and I know that, Lauren, your bass is slightly smaller than a 3/4. So why don't you sort of kick off by telling us how you found that bass and why you went for a smaller instrument, and then I'll give some feedback on mine and give some tips about sizes as well.
Yeah, well, when I was looking for a new instrument, I wanted something that was at least a little bit smaller than what I had. The instrument that I had before was a standard 3/4. It had, it was a gamba style, so it had really sloped shoulders. So I didn't have an issue necessarily playing or reaching around it, but it was a little bit difficult sometimes, to maneuver. I mean, I guess I did have some difficulty reaching around it and just maneuvering it that way, but I wanted something that was just a little bit on the smaller side, so I didn't have to worry about it. And I went to Robertson's and played all of the instruments. It was super fun. And then Aaron, one of the sons of the owner, brought in my bass, and I sat down with it, and it had like open seams, and it had like these really old strings on it, and it had been played in like 4 years. And I just knew the moment that I played it, like that was it, And for me, it was just that it fit so well against my body, and like my seated stance has changed so much since then, but even still, it just, it fit like I felt it was supposed to, and that was the thing for me. The string length is shorter, and the bass is smaller. I've measured it, and it's actually like really, really close to a half size, if not exactly a half size.
What's the string length on your bass, Lauren? Do you know?
Yeah, it's 38 and a half. I thought it was 38, and then I remeasured it, got the bridge moved in, it's 38 and a half.
That is quite small, yeah.
It's small.
I've
really
played
small, yeah.
a 39-inch scale bass once before, and I think it was nice. I liked it, yeah.
It is, yeah. It's easier to kind of move around, at least for me, like I have smaller hands than, I guess.
Well, you compared to Geoff Baditich,
Yeah.
like Geoff is, you probably, people probably don't know because you see him sat down all the time, but he's a really big guy, and I saw Geoff.
Enormous, yeah.
Yeah, he's really, really tall. Yeah. And he plays seated on a pretty much, as far as I can tell, pretty much a standard bar stool height seat. So, and he's with both feet on the floor, and that's because
that tells you how tall he is.
Exactly,
he's huge, and his bass is enormous, but people always will comment how it looks like a smaller instrument, which is hilarious because it's huge, and he's just very, very tall, And my teacher at University of South Carolina, Craig Butterfield, was the same way. He's not as tall as Geoff, but he's very, very close, and his instrument is not as big. I think it's a little bit on the smaller side. But anyway, I think the biggest thing that I realized in playing it was, that it was just my size. I mean, a lot of people will ask me, when they find out that it is a smaller bass, they'll kind of ask me about it. And it's really just, I'm smaller than the average bass player, to be honest, a lot of women are that play bass. And, there are a lot of men that are also, on the smaller side as well that play the instrument. And I think that you have to find the instrument that matches your size, in relation.
And what are the downsides of playing, a small instrument? Because as far as I can tell, in terms of, I think in terms of playability, the one I played anyway, I didn't really feel there was a massive advantage in terms of the difference in string. I didn't suddenly think, wow, this is so much easier to play. I just thought it was different, really. And I think the setup is key, whatever you're playing. I think when you get anything that's over sort of 42 inches, for me, it starts, in terms of string length, it starts to become a little bit more uncomfortable. If you've got these they're quite rare, but you do get basses that have got really long string lengths, 43 or whatever. And I think that's probably not such a great thing. But anything in the kind of general three-quarter realm of 41.5 inches string length, I sort of, that feels pretty comfortable to me. But a smaller body, I can definitely see the advantages of it, But
Right.
is there any sort of negative aspects to it? Like, is there anything that you don't have with your bass that you wish you did?
Well, I don't know. I think, to be honest, I feel like my bass is a little bit of a unicorn. Like of
Mm,
course I'm gonna have a differing opinion on my bass, or I'm just gonna
mm,
be a lot more positive about it. But the thing that I do like about it is that it does have a nice low end, and
mm,
it also has a really bright, punchy
mm,
upper end. And I think what people worry about is, the projection and
mm,
the, like boominess. And, to be completely honest with you, I don't know enough about, all the different sizes and the things
mm,
that impact it to really make an educated comment on it.
mm,
But, I think the bigger basses, like those big orchestral basses that you see,
mm,
those or basses that you see players often playing, those have that big boomy sound, that everybody's looking for. And so in that case, I get it. Like
mm,
they're older, they are huge, they've got a big sort of rumble kind of
mm.
thing. And so I get it why you would want that kind of instrument. And for a smaller instrument, I think that it, like I said, I am not really qualified, I think, to give an exact answer on
Mm.
it. But I don't know if smaller instruments would necessarily have that same kind of rumble, but I could be completely off the mark on that.
The problem is as well is that you get really big instruments that are just complete dogs. That you
Yeah,
cannot
yeah,
get them to resonate well.
yeah.
And you need
Hmm.
a real live instrument that reacts well with the bow. And it's the same with small instruments. Sometimes they sound, all instruments can sound poor if they're not set up well. And sometimes they just, I don't know, it's just a bit of a weird thing. Some basses work better than others.
Yeah, yeah,
Like I quite like my bass that I've got, but it doesn't have like a really amazing low end, but it's got a really nice sort of even tone. It works really well for jazz. And when I was doing my classical degree, I did have a slightly larger instrument actually, but I don't think
hmm,
it was. I don't know. I mean, it worked really well, but I don't. I mean, whether or not it would have worked just as well if it'd been smaller. Who knows? I mean, I think you need to
yeah,
get out there and
yeah,
be open minded
yeah.
and
And I
try
think
stuff out.
there's so many different variations, so
Mm,
many bases that you can choose from. And I think if all of the bases that are smaller just don't have the sound that you're looking for, or whatever,
mm,
then but you're maybe on the smaller side, or you just want an instrument that's easier to move around and you can't get that with a big bass, then maybe look into getting gamba shoulders so you can
mm,
actually like get your arm around it, or get a bass that maybe is still the same size, like a three quarters or a big three quarters or
mm.
whatever, but maybe isn't the body isn't as wide, something like that.
Yeah,
There's always something that,
within three quarters, there's a big realm of instruments, and I
yeah.
think the luthier that I go to, who does the work on my bass, is called Martin Bailey in the UK, and
Hmm.
I borrowed one of his basses once, which was a really full three quarters. It was pretty much at the top end of the three quarter range. And it
Right.
sounded absolutely amazing, but I did find it a bit harder just to get around. It was, and my bass is right at the lower end of the three quarters. It kind of looks
Yeah.
bigger in the videos because it's closer to the camera. And sometimes people think it's a really big instrument. I've had people email
Yeah.
me, and either
Yeah.
that or I'm really short. And in fact, both are pretty average. So anyway, Nuno, I feel like we haven't really answered your question, definitively, because essentially what we're saying is there's so many different variables, but you shouldn't rule out smaller instruments, and you should absolutely
Right.
consider them, and you should find the instrument that's right for you and the type of music that you're going to be playing. I think that's
Right.
probably our main takeaway for today. So hopefully that's helped you and you've enjoyed the discussion. Join us in the comments, let us know your thoughts, and we'll see everyone next time.